Good morning, everybody. We will get underway. All the technology is under control. So welcome, and Cam, welcome to you. And thanks for coming in from our very wet Otaki, I heard today. So the blessing. As we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just, so that with courage, vision and energy, we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion. Do we have any apologies? We have an apology from Mark de Haast that he has a home requirement with a sick child, but will be coming in by Zoom. Are there any other apologies?
I'm here by Zoom as well. Janet Holborough.
Oh, thank you, Janet.
Hi, kia ora.
Welcome. Do we have any declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda? No, thank you. Public speaking time, and we have a public speaker, Mrs. Padamsi. She would like to come forward. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair. Good to put a face to the voice. So I'm here today to speak to you in my official capacity as Chair of CRU. And I'd like to speak to you about the Operational Risk Summary, June 2020, referencing 0R12, Customer Focus, page 19 of your report. OR 12 states, customers' needs not fully met in the absence of a coordinated approach to increasing customer focus in Council's everyday work. I would like to raise 2 points on this matter. The first point is that the impact column for OR12 should include external investigations. An example of an external investigation is the ongoing investigation of the Office of the Ombudsman, reference number 561464. This is a two-part investigation, one that was completed in April, which I wrote about in my update to the Council in April, and the second, which is currently ongoing. I refer you to contract number 2020/C340 in relation to Jacobs listed with this committee on 18th November 2021. According to CRU, this is the only contract that Council has with Jacobs. There is no mention of a contract prior to or after that date. In other words, the only contract that Council has with Jacobs is for a coastal hazard risk assessment, and Jacobs has yet to deliver on this contract. However, Council does hold 2 volumes prepared by Jacobs for a coastal hazard susceptibility and vulnerability assessment. By Council's own admission, Council does not hold any records or documentation, such as a contract regarding these 2 volumes. Council was informed of this situation by myself in April, mainly that ratepayers paid for a report that Council did not commission and did not contract. As Chair of CRU, I would like to request that this subcommittee undertake an open investigation as to how Council received 2 reports without any documentation or contract. Such an investigation would identify processes or lack thereof that led to using ratepayers' monies that paid for these reports. We would welcome a transparent investigation with findings made public. To that end, CRU will make available its experts to present relevant information and assist in any way possible. I would also like to inquire as to what has been paid to Jacobs regarding their contract 2020/C340. I would also like to bring to your attention that the Jacobs reports are not in compliance with the NZCPS as they did not undertake a risk assessment. And as a result, in our view, it is not fit for the purposes of planning. Yet Volume 2 is being proposed by KCDC planners for use in an RMA regulatory rulemaking under Plan Change 2. This puts additional risk on this Council. The second point that I would like to raise in reference to OR12 is the need to include within the risk control column accurate information is being provided. This would help mitigate the impacts listed, such as reputational damage and loss of trust. This is regarding the misinformation posted on Council's website on Takutai Kapiti. As I've written to the CEO, copied to the Mayor and to the Chair, as well as to Mr. Power, there are several references to Council commissioning a susceptibility and vulnerability assessment. As the first part of the investigation of the Office of the Ombudsman's revealed, Council holds no documentation supporting this commission. Corrections to the website would mitigate that risk and would no longer have an impact. So for your reference, I am tabling contract 2020/C340 with this subcommittee, along with the presentation prepared by our experts entitled Coastal Hazard Risk Assessment, Risk Identification Assessment, and Hazard Management under the RMA and NZCPS. In summation, an open investigation undertaken by this subcommittee, along with assurances that Council will correct the information on the Takutai Kapiti website, would avoid the impact of any external investigations moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dempsey.
And I'll just table these here.
Thank you. I will reflect on what you've said and take advice, and we'll be back in touch in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'm not wanting to broach your issue with what I consider to be an administration lapse. That's what you can define. Putting that aside, I just want to go to your issues on risk assessment.
Risk assessment.
Yep. And you referred to the National Coastal Policy on Risk, which includes risk, which is a 2010 document. Are you familiar with the August 2020 National Climate Change Risk Assessment document? Are you familiar with that?
That's listed in our presentation that we have tabled today.
So can you tell me, in terms of cascading legal applicability, which statement precedes the other?
Well, I'm not so sure one precedes the other, but the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement is the overriding legislation for coastal hazards and the risk assessment.
I understand that. And because the first document is a general approach, subsequently those areas of risk are defined legally. And the document that we have currently active is the National Climate Change Risk Assessment. And I'll read you. It identifies 43 priority risks across 5 value domains, which includes natural environment, human economy, built environment, governance, and it highlights 10 risk areas considered to be the most significant. My understanding of the Jacobs report covers these, so I feel that you may be pontificating in a general direction, not specific to what changes have already happened.
No, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to hold the roundtable in February to have this discussion. But unfortunately, your instructions left very little room for anyone to attend. So, if you go to the CREW website, and I have tabled that presentation, it does talk about it. If you would like more information, I am not Dr. Ashby. I would be more than happy for him or one of our planners to be in touch with you to give you the difference on those two pages.
I welcome that, but add that I welcome that simply because I'm not standing for re-election, and I know that your organization, through the letters that you've written, have basically, possibly, if I can use this word, threatened political reaction if they don't attend your meetings. But I don't fall in that category.
I doubt very much that we would have threatened anybody.
Well,
that's a very serious accusation to make.
I can produce my response to your letter if need be. But on that basis, I'm quite welcome and interface with your experts.
You could have done that in February.
Well, we are doing it now.
Well, I'll
Thank
see
you,
what I can
Mrs.
do.
Padamsi. Thank you. Is there any other questions? Any other comments? Thank you very much. Right. Any members' business? Okay. So we'll move straight to the reports and 8.1, which is the health and safety report. And Diane, welcome. Masks can now be removed.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'd just like to present this report for the quarter 1 January to 31 March. There is nothing extraordinary to bring to your attention, but there were just a couple of clarification points that were raised at our pre-meeting, which refer to some information on page 9 in the lead indicator table. There is a jargon-related title under the role-related box which says Comp TIA A+. What that actually is code for a IT Foundation Digital Solutions type training course. And so I think next time we might just spell it out a bit more because, yeah, I apologise, I missed that. And
Is
then,
that course open to the technically illiterate like myself?
I don't believe so. I think it's just a little bit more into the professional career line. So also on page 10, under wellness initiatives, you'll see that the number of hours used and uptaken for the period for EAP services has leapt considerably since the last quarter. But I'd just like to let you know that that is not something that we're concerned about, given the background that we know to the usage for these hours, and they are not primarily as a result of workplace issues, that there are much wider aspects to be considered. So although it's a big jump, it's not a concern as such because we are across it. Oh, it's fantastic. Yes, and also when things happen in a team where one person may be affected by something that may have happened in their personal out of work life, we have a fantastic ability with their service to bring in a counsellor to talk to the team as a group to help them work through the issues that they may be feeling around their need and want to support their fellow team member and work through that together. And there's also the options for the individual care as well. So I have to say it is a very good service, and you know, we do get good value out of it. So on page 12, with the 3-yearly comparison for the total incidents, there is a big spike in that April to June, and that's not, I mean, it's not a spike. I mean, it just looks out of place when you look at that table, but a breakdown of what was going on that was related to quite a bit of an impact of third-party incidents around post-COVID restrictions and working through COVID restrictions and things like that. So it wasn't as if we had a absolute deluge of staff having accidents at work or anything like that. But it's just, you know, it's just when you see it like that, it can sometimes sort of stick out. Yes, it does. And you'll see that on the next page, which is on page 13, where it breaks down the total incidents into the third-party incidents, and you'll see that 3-yearly comparison for that same period is up there. But apart from that, there wasn't anything that I felt needed to be specifically brought to your attention. So, any questions?
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, there's been some quite publicised delays and constraints in people accessing mental health services and that sort of thing, and obviously EAP provides those sorts of services. Are we seeing sort of timely responsiveness from the services at EAP to requests that are coming through? Are we seeing any impacts in terms of, I guess, overall demand on their services limiting their availability to our staff given the increase?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes and no. So we have a process that when the staff access the service, they are run through a prioritisation criteria set of questions. The councillors determine what that priority is. If there is an issue, they will give me a call with the disclosure and consent of the staff member, and we facilitate a little bit of fast tracking. Sometimes, and more often than not, it's this way round, where a staff member will come to me and share their issue that they need some help, and they have called the EAP line and have been put in a queue and have had to wait a day before someone has got back to them. And so then I facilitate that. I have a direct line to the key provider, and I explain and I say I've got the consent of my staff member, so I really need someone to make contact. And so, having already established that with the staff member, the contact will be made pretty much immediately and taken through, because there's various levels of need. Yeah, and sometimes if that need can't be met through our counselling service, the counselling service will then take steps with the staff member to work with their GP or something else if it needs to be further progressed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Diane, sorry. Just a general interest question. With more and more people working from home, where does KCDC's health and safety line stop in terms of, workstation correctness, and, in terms of if someone's going to be working home for, say, a week, do we have any responsibility there? Or if they're working from home permanently, what responsibility do we have for ensuring they're working in a correct environment?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have a draft working from home policy which has not been formally circulated, but it has been it's used as our custom and process to have some consistency around that, because the Health and Safety at Work Act is very clear about what a workplace is and isn't. And so if an employer is requiring a staff member to use a premise on their own home ground, then that can be defined as a workplace, and therefore has to meet the criteria and standards that the council as the employer would be providing in terms of ergonomic assessments. And most importantly, one of our biggest risks is data security and information protection. So yes, we do. It's not open slather, free for all by any shape or form.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually, my wife, being a lawyer for the government, does work from home quite often, and I've been trying to set up the workstation for her and trying to ask, what does her work provide in the way of that sort of thing. So it just made me think about that for our employees. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We also do support staff to have an office sort of set up by making use of the current IRD COVID payments, which are tax-free to staff. And we provide laptops and keyboards and a mouse, but we are moving more and more towards our electronic data, so we don't have the issues of staff having to worry about carrying paper or having a printer at home or things like that. So we're moving forward in that direction to be more reliant on our electronic data. And the flip side of that is the the focus that the digital solutions team are having at ensuring our security of that data.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, we've talked about this before with the Health and Safety Plan 2020-23, and I obviously note on page 7 that it still has to have the discussion forum and that before it could even come to this table. Do we have a timeline on when that's possibly going to happen? Because I guess we're sort of 2/3 of the way through the time frame of that plan, or do we just sort of accept that it's in place, it's doing its thing, and because you'll obviously start work on developing the next tranche of it for 23 to 26 or whatever next, won't you? So it almost seems like by the time it gets here, we're almost at the end of the plan in terms of approving it. So we may as well look ahead to the next one, I suppose. Or is there some sort of legislative requirement for that plan to come to this to the subcommittees to get approved, regardless?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't believe there's a sort of a legislative requirement other than under the due diligence responsibilities. It's our responsibility to ensure you are aware of what we're doing. So whether the plan is in draft and keeps going or whether it's formally signed off and keeps going is probably neither here nor there. It's just our preference to work that we thought it would be really beneficial to be able to sit around the table and go through the plan so everybody understood what it was about before actually bringing it for the formalisation and then having everyone have to sit through all the questions that may or may take a lot of time. So with the constraints around COVID restrictions and alert levels and, our availability of our meeting rooms, and to be fair, it is the sort of thing that is best done across the table as opposed to remotely. It could be very clunky. So that's why it's actually been pushed out. But if there is a desire to do that, we can actually look at the calendar and bring that together so that we can actually do it if that is what is, if that's what you want, we can make that happen.
I was going to say that it seems like the plan is actually delivering good results in terms of, obviously barring those spikes that we've talked about, which are specific incidents rather than an overall trend. I think it's clearly delivering on what it's meant to do, so I'm fairly comfortable with just keeping on going how it is. So.
Just a quick couple of questions from me. You touched on it, Diane, about the aggression and that sort of thing, and we chatted about it the other day. Is this still of concern to you?
It's of concern because it's not just concern to us. It's a bigger social problem, and I think with the accessibility that we have of our front offices in our civic buildings, our service centres and our libraries, and especially with winter coming on now, there will be places that people don't usually hang out, so they will gravitate to nice spaces inside where there's heat. And I don't think it's going to go away. So we are ever vigilant. It is going to be a problem. It is going to be an ongoing problem, and we don't have the answer. Sometimes we think if we have security guards at the door that can assist us, but then there's quite a big chunk of the people that come into those services who see that person in a uniform, and that can actually trigger some behaviour. But at the same time, it gives our staff peace of mind, and it helps our staff feel safer because they feel they have that next line of protection. And I mean, it's a really tricky one, and it's a hard one, but it's not getting better, and it is going to be a problem, and we have to get a little bit more savvy about how we're doing it, which is why it's been loaded onto one of our priorities to make sure that we're equipping staff to identify things before they escalate.
I think the other thing that sort of worries you is that I don't think there's any alternative to what's been done with security, but I could only imagine the cost unbudgeted for for having to do that, and if it wasn't something near $500,000, I'd be surprised. But just huge cost. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments, Mr. Chief Executive?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stereo. Yeah. I guess I just wanted to add to Diane's comments there in terms of those issues around aggression and risk and staff welfare. Certainly at the SLT table, that has been the focus of a number of agenda items over the last several months, not just the COVID-related issues and the response to those. I'm sure you're aware that Horowhenua, there was an issue at Horowhenua with the Chief Executive there. It is something that we are very conscious of, and actually, Mike's not here, but we are looking at initiating a review of security, staff welfare, and welfare with regard to all of our facilities that will be carried out over the next 6 to 8 weeks to see if there is anything that we can do to improve on the current measures that we have in place, because we did a piece of work, I think, 2 years ago with regard to staff safety, certainly in our buildings and facilities. So, yes, so it is a key item of concern from a health and safety perspective, and we will be having a report back to SLT on if there are things that we can do better in terms of the facilities and buildings and staff.
Any other comments?
Just picking up on your comment, Diane, about coming into the winter months, is there some social organisations that we can connect with, whether it's the Maori Wardens or whether it's KYS or somebody like that can almost be on call to say, hey, we've got these youth in here and can you help us with them? I don't know whether that's a possibility, because I would say that the Maori Wardens have quite a connection with the community in that respect.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I understand that in the past, Otaki Library has certainly made use of those resources. I'm not sure to the extent that Parapara Umu does, given that it's got a much larger staff component and there's much more space there to, spread out of it. But I would be surprised if we are not looking at that.
Okay,
yeah.
That's good, thank you.
Councillor Holborough.
Thank you. So, yeah, we're all a little tiny bit on edge because of the attack that happened on our building. I'm presuming that will be recorded in the next quarter. What kind of work are we doing with neighbouring councils and sector-wide around kind of health and safety in our facilities? Because, it is something that's not going to get better, it's going to get worse.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have sort of a quarterly regional HR managers forum where we talk about the current issues that are affecting our organisations in terms of, primarily at the moment, it's the psychological well-being and the physical safety of staff. So those two things are always on the agenda, and because it's a small group, we are regularly emailing and in contact talking about that to make sure that none of us are out of step. And the sad thing is that when there's no difference, it's just the scale of it that is different depending on the area that the council is located and the demographic of the community. But the problems and the issues and the incidents, you could just, it could be any of us on any day.
So was that, apologies if I missed it, was that recorded in our report that occurs, that regional meeting, because it's an important activity in the health and safety space?
No, it's not recorded, but it can be.
I think it would be a good idea, yeah. Thank you. But don't know if others agree?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good idea.
Get a bit closer. To you, Mr. Chair, I think the oh yes, feel like the president. So if you hadn't picked up, we are having some technical difficulties in terms of the microphones in the chamber. So we will persevere, and hopefully we might have to share one mic between everyone. But I just wanted to respond. I think there was a reference to this building, and I'm not sure if people are aware that the one of the windows in the mayor's office shattered last week. So we haven't actually determined that was a deliberate. I'm not going to call it an attack, but that it was caused by some external object. We're still looking at whether it was actually a malfunction in the glass, and whether it's because they're double glazed, the heat difference between the outer glass and the inner glass may have caused that to shatter. There's nothing on the site that would suggest there was an object thrown at the window, or there was no hole in the window. There was nothing to suggest it was deliberate. But when the glass is replaced, we'll have a look at whether there's something at fault with that glass, and obviously need to consider that with regard to the rest of the building if there is an issue there with the glass.
Thanks for that clarification.
Mr. Chair, I need to respond to that, of course. I think we can get overly paranoid because of what's been happening, and so think incidents like this can be misconstrued. But having said that, you recall my column mentioned a letter that was sent to me, very highly critical, saying that I was cursed by God. So maybe that's what's happened.
Are there any other questions or comments? I have to say I'm delighted about the interest in this whole area, because we mustn't forget our most valuable asset are our people. So I'd refer you to page 6.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favour? Against? Carried. The Mayor.
The man moved.
Councillor Buswell. Yeah. We'll give them, everyone will have a turn. All right, if we could then move to page 14, which is our progress update on the Audit Control Findings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone.
Good report.
Thank you. Right. So we'll take this report as read. The main difference from this report to the last one is just a small addition that was by recommendation of the Chair, just to add the estimated completion date column on the right-hand side of the columns on page 15. But yeah, other than that, progress is still underway, and yeah, that's kind of the main gist of this report.
I'll just refer you on to page 60, the top item on the approval of expenditure. There you go. Keep that one in the middle. That's right. The approval of expenditure at a recommendation by audit. I have been, and I don't know whether it was formalised, but I have been approving the Mayor's expenses, and so that needs to be amended to say that, which I think you're going to.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We're gonna with the CFO. I had talks the other day, so we'll definitely go into that.
All right. Any questions on that report?
Thank you. Through the chair, also on page 16, obviously we had the public speaker today make some allegations about contracts not being in place for work undertaken by Jacobs. Do we have any further information on that? Because on the one thing, I was a little confused given that she said that they'd only been engaged to undertake work on one topic, but we've also had them doing the hydrology stuff for the whare mako as well, hasn't they? So I guess what's our understanding of that situation in terms of whether contracts have been in place for work undertaken and that sort of thing?
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, I was going to respond to that in the risk. I think there was a reference to the risk report. So I'm happy to do that now, or I can respond to it as part of that paper. But I think it would be good for this committee, any other suggestion with regard to an investigation. The issue that was referenced in terms of the commission with Jacobs for the coastal hazard work, the issue really there is that work has not been completed in terms of the first three stages of it. And even though there have been 2 volumes of work completed, when you sum those together with the third piece of work, which is the risk assessment, you will then have basically completed the work that Jacobs were commissioned to do in terms of that hazard and risk assessment. So it is, I mean, in terms of the naming of the reports, it's the fact that we've split it into 3 stages that seems to be causing some concern to crew. I'm certainly not concerned that they've provided something that they weren't commissioned to do contractually, or that by splitting it into 3 sections that we've somehow stepped outside of the contractual arrangements with Jacobs. I mean, the scope of their work was to provide advice and also to provide input into the takutu kapiti process in terms of advising the CAP, so they will still continue to do that. And the report itself, as I said, once we receive the third piece of that work, which is the risk assessment, because you can't undertake a risk assessment without understanding the consequence in terms of what it is that you're defining in terms of risk. So the vulnerability and hazards report, as it's named at the moment, sets out the extent, I guess, of that spatial consequence in terms of the hazard, which is that coastal erosion and sea level rise. You then need to factor in consequence in terms of not just loss of beachfront or loss of dunes. It also then needs to consider, the social implications associated with that, which would be, totally different if you're looking at Paraparaumu Raumani than if you're looking at the dune frontage in Otaki, say. So you have to factor in the social, the financial, there's cultural impacts that need to go in there to allow you to come up with a robust risk assessment or risk rating that then will flow through into the district plan process. So it's really, we're 2/3 of the way through that process. So until it's completed, to say that the contract is not valid or that it's somehow we've stepped outside of that is not accurate. So we're certainly happy to provide a response. I've provided a number of responses to the issues that have been raised today. Happy to forward those again. I think I sent something out earlier in the week that was related to the issue raised. I think I went to all, possibly, maybe it was a response to an email that if you weren't included. Yes. So Councillor Pravanov asked very similar questions, and the chair was on that response. So I'm happy to recirculate that. And again, I don't believe there's an issue or a concern in terms of anything contractually that we're doing at the moment. There was a reference, I think, to paperwork to back up the way that we're processing that work, and it may be that a file note possibly should have been taken at the time where they agreed to stage it into 3 parts, but it wouldn't have changed the final outcome in terms of the work that's done. And on the scheme of risk, I've reminded staff, even if it is minor and everyone agrees that it's not an issue and it is basically makes more sense to do something that way, that it's a good idea just to keep a record of that, certainly in this coastal space, if that question comes up again. So is that...
I've got another supplementary question. Is that my understanding that this is contractual law, right? It will be framed under contractual law. Is it my understanding that this particular contract had iterations in it and it was open-ended because of the nature of the contract? To give. So it was open-ended in that sense.
I guess any contract will have an element of uncertainty around elements within that contractual arrangement. So it's bound within a scope that defines how you pay for those works and I guess the basic bones of that agreement in terms of the contract. But because you're dealing with the cap and there's a provision in them there for them to respond to questions that come up, then you will always have potential to either to have variations or to have slight changes in terms of the work program as you work through that. And that's just the nature of the work. I mean, one component of that commission with Jacobs that has certainly increased in terms of scale is actually interacting with community groups. And I think there was a request for the cost associated with the Jacobs work, which we have already previously provided to Crew. An element of that wasn't allowed for and is over and above what we originally estimated is dealing with organisations like Crew in terms of providing responses. So Jacobs have also provided, and I think there was reference to a meeting between Jacobs and Crew's experts. So that wasn't in the scope of the original contract, but obviously to ensure the council gets a good outcome in terms of the overall work, that was included as a variation. So that's the nature, I guess, of some of the professional services advice, and you've got a mechanism there to price the work. Then if it sits within the delegation or sits within that GM's delegation and it adds value to the project, then that's where you would actually look to add variations to it.
You can think of is where they have got a grip on this issue is administrative lapse.
Yeah, like I said, so that was agreed at a meeting, and again, the scale of what was agreed in terms of change is not significant. So, absolutely there are occasions where you might have a conversation about making a minor change to the work program, and if everyone's in agreement and it's not significant, it's not a major risk, it's not basically changing the output, then you would proceed with it, and you may not put that through as a notification to the contractor in terms of a variation. But as I said, it's good practice just to record that or record a file note to reflect that has actually occurred. And in this case, it was done through a verbal conversation, and that's the Crew reference to, and that's the work that's currently working through that Ombudsman process. But again, I don't believe there's anything of significance there in terms of concern with regard to that Jacobs work and the output from that work.
There'll be a fee.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, what I heard the person say was that Jacobs had carried out work that wasn't commissioned but was paid for by the council, and I think you've dealt with it, but I'd just like you to be quite explicit. Was that correct or wasn't it?
That was incorrect. The title of the second report that's been provided differs from, I guess, the overall title of the commission, but within that commission it has elements of work that provided that second report. So it certainly is not something that we haven't commissioned or is not covered by that contract.
Any other comments or questions?
Councillor Holbrook.
Oh, sorry, councillor, I keep missing you.
It's okay. Apologies. I had to come in by Zoom today. Particularly the first part of Mr. Mellon's response was really really clear, and I'm wondering. I think the chair said that he would get back to Ms. Pedamsi about her concerns. So I think this is a really good opportunity to put on the public record that response in terms of Mr. Mellon's response today. So I'm wondering if it's appropriate for the minutes to be quite fulsome around this today, so that it's on the public record, and also whether it's appropriate that Mr. Mellon provides the chair with a response to forward on to Ms. Pedamsi, so that it's all transparent and clear. And I think the fact that she came along today is just a real opportunity to just clear this all up, because it's been going round and around for a while now.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I also think that I said we would take advice on whether there would be an inquiry. My feeling is, having heard that response, that we certainly don't need to do anything that's outside what is already happening in this area. If everyone is of the same opinion.
Sorry, could I just add? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks. I guess the only point to note is that we are partway through an Ombudsman investigation into the claims that were made today. So it may be more useful to wait until that's completed. Certainly the minutes will record my response. I'm not sure in terms of what level of detail, but there will be an opportunity to do that. But it may be also worth, if we're waiting through, and Tim might be able to update you when we get to that section of the paper, that it might be better to tidy that whole thing up in terms of the response for the Ombudsman. At the same time, we can also make that public potentially in terms of where that ends up. But again, that's probably a conversation for that we would have once we get that outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, no other comments? All right, if we could then move to page 14, recommendation that the committee notes the progress regarding Ernst & Young's report on control findings, and that Ernst & Young will reassess these as part of their audit at the year end, 30th of June. Do I have a mover? Mover, Councillor Compton. Seconded, the Mayor. Your Worship. Thank you. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, so you're still with us? So, page 23. Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a risk management report, so I'll take this one as read as well. The main gist of this report is that we've done a bit of work separating the Appendix 3 into strategic and operational risks, just to better reflect the strategic and the operational split. And that's just using the guidance of the ISO standard. But yeah, other than that, it's pretty standard. Thank you.
Mr. Simpson, you're usually good around this area, not like you not to have a question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, we have a meeting with Mark and his team, and one of the issues that I raised at that meeting was that the totality of the CAPEX program being disrupted. And of the capital works program with an estimate of disruption and remedial times, etc., etc. And I was referenced a report that showed that information. So I was reassured by that.
Thank you. Just referencing the difficulty to recruit and retain staff, there was some comment earlier in the week with councillors in this regard, and it says that we've got some concerns. I think that further down the track, councillors need to revisit a budget, particularly in the next annual plan, to try and address the issues in terms of retaining staff. And we're finding that many of our staff are leaving because they are poached and offered way higher remuneration. So I think that this is an area that we just need to highlight as it's got some concerns here, but I think it should actually be perhaps elevated in our next assessment to a little bit more of just some concerns.
Yes.
Thank you. Through the chair, my question was actually is on a similar vein to that, and in relation to that, the issues we're having around retaining and recruiting staff, and the fact that that's flowing onto our ability, the emergency response and our core functions, and the ability to deliver those. And if you look at, say, the reform programs coming up, and this, I guess, the pressure on our staff and the demand from other agencies to poach them is not going away anytime soon. What triggers would see that elevated from some concerns to it being a major concern? What, I guess, given that there is a standard around what I presume what defines it becoming some concerns or major concerns. So what would be the triggers that would see us having major concerns over our ability to retain and train staff?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I mean, I can talk on from an infrastructure perspective. You know, our ability to deliver and respond in terms of emergency management, or probably more capital delivery and business as usual. At the moment, it's probably more a function of external issues with supply and market pressure with regard to delivery, as opposed to an internal staffing issue. So I think I mentioned at a previous briefing, project management is an area where there is a significant shortage in terms of skill set. So what we're doing there is having to bring in more external resource to help with that. So there's certainly a financial implication associated with that, and that is probably one of the other key risks, certainly for me, is that staff retention and staff well-being, but is also escalations in terms of costs of delivery, and we're seeing it across the country. And there's a number of articles this week. I think Wellington City had an article, Wellington Water, on earlier in the week about their costs, about pipe delivery. It's basically we're delivering less for more, basically. So there is an issue there, and it is something that we will be looking at as part of next year's annual plan process in terms of that whole affordability question around some of the work that's currently in the program. The issue with that, though, is that a lot of that work relates to renewals and work that you start to certainly go backwards if you start deferring some of those critical elements. And some of the bigger numbers do relate to water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, buildings, library, those sorts of things. So there's a bit of a balance there, and not wanting to degrade those assets or go backwards, balanced against the cost of actually providing those. And maybe that's another conversation around phasing. So, but in terms of some of the triggers that might escalate those risk ratings, certainly within the building compliance and regulatory, our ability to deliver back on our minimum requirements there in terms of KPIs is something that we monitor pretty closely. We're starting to see that slip. That's going to have implications for the organisation, but also on the rate of development within the district as well. So that's one indicator. Another one, again, would probably be work slippage to the extent where we don't have staff to actually provide that. Again, as part of sort of linked to KPIs, but it will come back through the quarterly report to council to some extent. And the other one will be monitoring that salary budget in terms of the risk there is that we will potentially, because we can't stop a lot of the work that we do, that there will be pressure applied to that budget potentially, and again that'll be something that we report back through to council. So there are a number of things that we can keep an eye on, and then start to reflect that back maybe in terms of the risk, and there are a number of things that we can do to potentially mitigate that. And I mentioned some of them in terms of staff retention, looking at different ways to not remunerate but provide other benefits to staff. You know, we're looking at the moment, one option is a subsidised e-bikes, things like that, access to the council's facilities. Go some of the way, but generally it's the salary number is the bigger incentive. But we are looking to try and do what we can to add to those basic sort of elements of contracts. And we are seeing, I mean, with Transmission Gully, and I don't know whether it's just a bit of a peak at the moment. We're still getting quite a few applications in some areas for people that live in Kapiti and want to stay within Kapiti and work here. So, but yeah, it is an ongoing issue in terms of management.
Thank you.
And just a follow-up question. You touched on it when you were talking about the cost escalations in the infrastructure space, and I saw this morning there was a story from Auckland Council that Phil Goff's looking at using the Better Off funding from Three Waters basically to plug the dam that is bursting in terms of all their cost pressures and that sort of thing. Is that essentially the road we're going to have to look at here, rather than pursuing new projects with the Better Off Three Waters funding? We're going to have to look at using it to enable us to do just some of what we're planning to do anyway, rather than any shiny new things.
Yes, certainly that is. I think we are coming back to brief the council on suggested projects that we would look to allocate that funding to. Obviously, you know, the next tranche of that funding is not until 2024, and I think at the moment we're looking at getting about 5.2 million. So it's not a huge boost in terms of our capital program, but it would certainly help us to keep within probably our cap in terms of the LTP, in terms of actual council borrowing and capex. And as I mentioned, as we lock in the annual plan in terms of carryovers, that will again help manage us to stay below, I think, the 80 million or the cap that we've set in terms of our financial strategy. So that's one way that we would look to use that, and hopefully the government, when we find out what we're likely to get in terms of that debt repayment, will also be another way potentially to buffer some of that over the next 3 years, because I don't think it's going to be something that goes away. You know, something that's going to be around for a while, I think, in terms of some of those increased costs.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Can't ask me a question.
He's offline. Yes.
might be a lower risk. So, through you, Mr. Chair, kia ora, Andrew. And this is something you might actually, want to comment on, Sean. So, in terms of risk management, we've unfortunately had the loss of a very senior member of the staff. How did that go in terms of the risk management and, you know, the items that are in place? How smooth was the transition for, say, Sean to step in to the roles, and was there any learning from that we need to put in for further risk? Or just a question of
timing might be a
So we had the sudden loss of Hayden, and then did that go smoothly to transition to you being able to take over? And was there any learnings from there in terms of, you know, information that wasn't recorded or things that make your life easier?
Yep. So to the chair, I think so. My role here as Deputy Chief Executive made a big difference in terms of that transition. So the CE and myself would often attend the same meetings, or we would certainly back each other up in terms of work program and understanding what was coming on, and I guess my attendance at, again, a lot of meetings potentially that don't necessarily impact on infrastructure has helped. Well, I hope it's helped. I'm not in terms of the organisation at the moment. It certainly has it's helped me to step into that seat. I think it would have been difficult without having that deputy role and having that understanding. I guess the other element is that I've been around for a while and have a pretty good understanding of the organisation, so that has certainly helped. I mean, I don't know if I can comment on any more than that. I guess in terms of timing, obviously, it's a lot going on at the moment. So, and there's a fair bit of pressure on the organisation. So, we are doing our best to work through those issues, and I think we're doing okay at the moment. But that would be my in terms of risk mitigation. Having that deputy or having someone that can back you up is a major benefit if you do. And maybe, it's not sure if it's in here, succession planning, that type of focus across the organisation is something that we're very aware of at SLT. For other key roles, having someone that you're developing and our third tier managers is a key element of our people development and a risk area that we are conscious of that within SLT, and making sure that we're developing leadership resource across the organisation so that people can both have a career pathway and that's part of making this place an attractive place for people to work, but also does help if you have staff. Obviously, staff leave all the time, and council continues to operate. So that is another key risk mitigation practice. I think that we're certainly aware of and looking to do more in that space.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. That's very clear.
I think good question, Cam. It's not an ideal position to be in, given the huge amount of changes, the government legislation is going on. There's an old saying, you don't change houses in the middle of the stream. But we're in a situation, it's not a stream, it's a raging river. So changing, but given that, the transition, there's a transition within the transition. So this particular transition has been working well.
Any other comments? Just a question, Andrew, on page, trying to see which page it is. It must be page 37, and it was the infrastructure service disruption, and particularly around natural hazards. And the very last comment, I know you've highlighted it because it's been updated, but it says it has been assumed that the government 60%, 60-40 funding will be, arrangement will be in place. Should we not know that rather than assume it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe the Corporate Services Group Manager might be able to make a comment on that one.
Morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Look, in terms of a couple of years ago, central government had a real focus on changing that arrangement, 60-40, and it has gone quiet. Central government have not confirmed that the arrangement of the 60-40 share will remain in place. But it's one of those things that until such time as they tell us, we keep asking and they don't confirm. So until such time as they confirm otherwise, we will just assume that the 60-40 split is there, and we have renewed our insurance, placing 40% cover, and that's consistent across local government. So it is a frustration for us. Central government won't simply just confirm to us that 60% still stands, but in the absence of them actually expressly saying it doesn't, if we had a natural catastrophe, they would be up for their 60% share.
I think the concern that I had was that if, for instance, that they decided they weren't going to do it, then it leaves us pretty exposed as far as insurance is concerned.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, just placing insurance, it's very, very hard to get insurance cover for the 40% our liability, and the market continues to tighten, premiums continue to go up. So if we didn't have the 60% support, we would be in big trouble. So as I said, we work very closely with Aon. It's something that we table quite frequently, and no one has received any clear guidance from central government saying they're not, and so it's a practice that's been in place for a very, very long time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ian. Sorry, I can't hear. Yeah. You've got a selection down there. You might be able to.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that. It's my understanding that government practice has been that they come in with their 60%, even though they won't actually confirm that will be that will apply going forward. I believe the Seddon earthquakes and the Christchurch earthquakes, that is what has happened. So that has been the practice.
All right, nothing else. Very good report, Andrew. I think I like the way you've split the risks into operations and strategic. I think that makes a lot of sense. So can I refer everyone to page 23? There is a recommendation that the Audit and Risk Subcommittee receives and notes this report, including the appendices 1, 2 and 3. Have a mover, please. Moved and seconded. Moved Councillor Buswell, seconded Councillor Compton. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, sorry, I put the motion. I think I'm at a bore. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Goodness me, you've got a starring role today. So, page 53.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a report on the internal audit work programme. So I'll take the report as read, but just a couple of things to note. This is a startup function within our team, and we're really excited to present the work programme going forward for the next financial year. The work programme that's in there will be bringing updates to the future Audit and Risk Committee subcommittee meetings. And on page 58, the fraud mitigation policy. We have actually already started the work on the internal audit for that, so we will be looking to bring an update in the next meeting on that one. Yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you. Did I hear you say the word excited?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit geeky, but yeah, we are excited in our team.
I'm delighted to hear it. Right, any questions or comments, please? All right, if none, we'll take the recommendation, which is on page 53, that the Audit and Risk Subcommittee notes the risk assurance governance structure attached and the internal audit work program for quarter 1 to 22-23. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Seconder, Mr. Simpson. Thank you. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Ian, it is your turn in the sun. The man who juggles the money.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. So this is the quarterly Treasury compliance report. Just a very quick overview from me. Our net debt at the end of March was 167.9 million, which equated to 175% of operating income, and that compares against the LTP limit of 280%. So because our CapEx spend is tracking below the LTP projected levels, our debt is similarly lower, and we expect to end below the LTP forecast for the end of the year. There wasn't a great deal of activity in the quarter. We drew down 15 million of new debt, and that was applied to pre-funding of maturities. And so all that means is Our pre-funding strategy is that we can pre-fund debt repayments up to 18 months in advance. So we drew that 15 million down and placed it on term deposit to align with the dates of the maturities and the repayments of that debt over time. And where that took us to, as at the end of March, we have our next two maturities completely pre-funded, May and October 22, and we were well on the way towards fully pre-funding our April 23 maturity. In terms of our compliance, we've complied with all the policy controls over the quarter, so they're reported in detail in the paper. They cover things like the overall debt levels, level of hedging, maturity profiles, etc. And the details reported there, but we complied with everything during the quarter. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just one from me is with the increase in deposit rates with banks and that now, is that sort of helping us with our pre-funding?
It is. So the majority of our debt book is fixed, but we've got around 20% that floats, and so both sides of the equation, when we draw the money down, the term deposits that we're getting are increasing. Similarly, the floating rate that we're paying is increasing as well, but we're still retaining a margin in the middle. So we drew down 5 million last month, and we ended up with about a 1.5% margin between the two to the good. But of course, the floating side of it will reset. It resets quarterly, so the gap will close over the period. But overall, still comfortable. We're certainly not losing money on pre-funding. We're actually to the good.
Thank you, Councillor Compton.
Thank you, the Chair. I know that in our long-term plan, we were always tracking below in terms of not only our 280% self-imposed cap, but also obviously the 300% LGFA cap. But that LGFA cap did come back down over time, didn't it? When does it start to drop back down from 300%? Just obviously because we are tracking below our capital program at the moment, but we know costs are going up, so you sort of.
Yep.
I know we're applying funding for it and shuffling stuff around to try and make it work, but how, are we going to end up with a bit more headroom than we sort of anticipated as stuff gets pushed out, or how's this all going to play out? Or is it a case of wait to see the next long-term plan?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I think it will be, as you say, I think it will quietly, because we're not spending the full capex. I think we'll see the headroom come down. And so the 300% in response to COVID, so that's the limit set by LGFA, and in response to, I beg your pardon, it was 280, I think, and they increased it to 300% for a couple of years, and it steps down to 280 about 2 years from now. We don't expect, and we won't breach 280 before then. So hence in our LTP we adopted 280 because we didn't need that extra piece. And by memory in the LTP, I think we brushed up against 280 in about year 5. So yeah, time will tell, but I'd expect we won't be any higher than that in our reforecasts.
So we might end up with a bit of extra headroom.
Yeah, and then of course there's Three Waters, which is
ruins every.
Well, it changed. It's very material. Still to be determined. There will be a process, no doubt, over the remainder of this year. I expect where, DIA will come out and do their due diligence, and there'll be a discussion around how much debt transfers. But it's likely to be north of 100 million. It's that sort of magnitude, so it's very significant.
I just want to add a little bit to so even though we are tracking below our current capital program delivery rate, we're actually getting to the point where we're getting to those key civil and major projects that are getting closer to. Waikato Library is a good example, the Link Road is a good example. So in the front up lead into those, we're not spending a lot of money in that space, but I expect once we start to get those moving, you'll see a significant jump in terms of that work program. So it won't take much. The Link Road I think was 20-something million, and the library's got maybe 13 million, but those were numbers, certainly the library, based on sort of 2 years ago. So our ability to actually spend is going to ramp up once we get closer to final delivery on some of those bigger capital projects, which is going to happen in the next probably 18 months. So it all probably aligns quite well with the Three Waters. If, as Ian said, they do, we do get as much as that in terms of the debt paid back to council, but that's all going to probably align around the 23, 24, 25, that chunk of time in terms of expenditure.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, if I could refer you to page, thank you Ian very much, page 59, that the Audit and Risk notes the Council's full compliance with its Treasury management policy for the 3 months to 31st of March. Moved Councillor Compton, seconded Councillor Buswell. All in favour? Against? Passed. Thank you. Right, the minutes of our meeting, which was held online on the 3rd of March. Does anyone have any comments about those minutes at all? Seems a long time ago, doesn't it? Now? All right. Would someone move those minutes, please? Councillor Compton, seconded Mr Simpson. All in favour? Against? Fine. Thank you very much, everybody. We now have a confirmation to a resolution to exclude the public. Do I have a mover, please? Councillor Compton, seconded Councillor Buswell. All in favour? Against? Carried.
Just give me a couple of minutes while I turn everything off. Just need to turn everything off.
Oh, right. Of course.